Thank you all for coming here. Our first reader, we'll get right to it, is Dean Bartoli Smith. And he will be reading from his newly published book about the Baltimore Ravens Super Bowl victory called Never Easy, Never Pretty, which will be for sale out there afterwards. When the Ravens won the Super Bowl XLVII in New Orleans, it was a joyous moment for fans and team alike. For Smith, a lifelong Baltimore football fan and writer for the Baltimore Brew and the Press Box, it was especially sweet. In Never Easy, Never Pretty, he recalls the ups and downs and the ultimate thrills of a special season, while also showing how a football team impacts its fans and its city. Smith's poetry has appeared in Poetry East, Open City, Beltway, The Pearl, The Charlotte Review, Gulfstream, and Upstreet, among others. His book of poems, American Boy, won the 2000 Washington Writers' Prize and was also awarded the Maryland Prize for Literature. In 2001, for the best book published by a Maryland writer over the past 3 years. He also received an MFA in poetry from Columbia University and is director of Project MUSE, a leading provider of digital humanities and social science content for scholarly community. Thank you very much, Dean.
Thanks, John and Deborah. I just want to mention my brother showed up with his wife from Kansas City, total surprise, about half an hour ago. I nearly collapsed on the cobblestones. So I just turned 50, so I need these things. And I'm going to read from a chapter called Under Fire. The book basically takes you through the whole season, and Under Fire was when we played the Redskins, and then we went and played the Broncos, and a lot of things happened that didn't look like we were going to win a Super Bowl. And I'm reading this for John because he's a Redskins fan, and I think there's some others here too. Ron, if I'd have known, I would have read the Giants chapter for you. So every chapter starts with a poem, and Shirley Brewer's poem called Wanted starts this chapter. It's just an excerpt. Every football player tells a story, how he made the team, the wondrous desire, the game first happening in the bones of his boyhood. The Baltimore Ravens beat the New York Giants 34-7 in Super Bowl XXXV on January 28, 2001. A few days before, Washington Post writer Tony Kornheiser published a column excoriating fans who had jumped on the Ravens bandwagon entitled, "DC Root for Baltimore? Only a Raven Lunatic." Kornheiser was incensed about the Washingtonians rooting for a team that had been playing in Baltimore for about 8 minutes. He went on to say that the city needed to hate the Ravens. I lived in the DC metropolitan area at the time and sent the Post a letter that was published in response to the column. I wrote that DC wasn't filled with Redskins fans either, but Midwesterners on 2 years assignments who had told their parents they wanted to be president, and the problem was they weren't president. I also threw in that Baltimoreans wouldn't root for the Redskins if they were the last team on earth. In retrospect, Kornheiser had been right. For example, the Callahan family in College Park, Maryland, had been thrown into turmoil. Dennis Callahan had been a Redskins fan since childhood, and he switched his allegiance to the Ravens when they, as he told me, through sheer force won Super Bowl XXXV. His son Dan remained loyal to the Redskins. "My son wasn't happy with his father," said Michelle Callahan. I'd be lying if I said it didn't annoy me at least a little bit," said Dan. Tony had also been right about me. I too was one of those fans who jumped on the Ravens bandwagon. I hadn't watched an entire Ravens game in my life until the 2000 playoffs. There was no prolonged suffering that real fans of teams endure, the purgatorial fires of consecutive losing season that strengthened the bond. I had rallied behind the blue-collar quarterback Trent Dilfer. I cheered for Chan and Char. I had leapt onto the purple bus because I was pleased for my hometown, a place I didn't know anymore, but I wasn't a Ravens fan. I was convinced that authentic Redskins fans didn't exist in the transient metropolis of DC. And then I met my first diehard Redskins fan. Ashby Owen had worked as a letter carrier before he retired, and my wife and I lived two doors down from him on Walnut Street in Alexandria, where our daughter, Mary Julie, was born. Owen was a lifelong Washington Redskins fan. Every Sunday when there was a home game, he put on his tan sports jacket, ironed white shirt, and burgundy tie, and headed out to FedEx Field. I always dressed up. If it was hot, I'd wear a white sport coat. That's just me. I always wore a hat too, he said in a stately Virginia drawl. My favorite hat of his was a pigskin brown fedora with a red band. I had coffee with former President Nixon. He once told me, Nice man. We talked about the state of the world. I delivered his mail, and he'd invite me in every once in a while. Mr. Owen started going to Redskins games in the 1960s. His last season on the 50-yard line at FedEx Field was 2012. And so we'll jump a little bit. So in this book, it's really a fan's perspective. There's stuff about the games and part memoir, part reportage, and part about what this team means for the city. When the Colts left in 1984, Redskins games were shown every Sunday in Baltimore. The station got flooded with irate callers, said former Colts color man Vince Bagley. Baltimore Colts fans weren't about to start following the Redskins. Older Colts fans remembered the efforts of Redskins owner George Preston Marshall in the early 50s to keep a team from coming to Baltimore. He had wanted to call his team the Baltimore-Washington Redskins to capture both markets. Things had started looking up for Mr. Owen and the Redskins in 2010 when Dan Snyder hired Mike Shanahan to coach the team. He's right out of the Gibbs mold, Ashby told me during the interview. I think that Dan Snyder is going to turn out to be a good owner in the end, too. So we'll move ahead a little bit. And as you know, the Redskins win this game in the last second, pretty much. They get they're down 8 points. They drive the length of the field. RG3 also gets hurt. Haloti Ngata hits him and hurts him. And we end up losing the game. And so afterwards, I'm going to take you through the post-game of that. Baltimore Sun columnist Mike Preston wrote a report card after every game. After the Redskins game, Joe Flacco received a grade of C. He still struggles with pocket awareness and doesn't know when to step in the pocket. Flacco started the season off strong, but has returned to his old form of being inconsistent, not just from game to game, but half to half. Preston gave the linebackers a D. He would have failed them, but according to his grading system, you are eligible for a D in gym class as long as you put the uniform on. John Harbaugh began the press conference by congratulating the Redskins. "We're not going to be disheartened," said Harbaugh in a video captured by reporter Jerry Coleman. "We understand what we are fighting for. I think we understand where we got to go to be better as a football team. Some things we have to, Then he paused uncharacteristically for a second, distracted by something on his mind, and considered what he was going to say. To be the kind of football team we want to be here in December. He was struggling to reveal something that was about to happen, and his answers were clipped. One reporter then asked him about the offensive performance in the second half, and he answered the question by first talking about how the defense responded well after the first quarter, and then added hastily that he needed to look at the tape to answer the question. The Ravens had scored 28 points against the Redskins, but had been inconsistent in the second half and had lost the game. The offensive line had done a poor job of protecting the quarterback when the game was on the line. Their offense was now ranked 19th in the NFL. In the biggest move of his 5-year head coaching career, John Harbaugh walked into offensive coordinator Cam Cameron's office at 5 a.m. on Monday morning, December 10, 2012, and fired his friend, former boss, and one-time mentor. He would say that the short walk through his office to Cameron's was a painful one. "There is a very human side to this," said Harbaugh, who was quoted in Press Box magazine. "Cam is my friend. He taught me a lot about coaching, and he is an outstanding coach. Personally, this is the hardest thing I've ever had to do." So then we'll just move over a little bit and talk about the next week, which was against Denver. The Ravens and Broncos were headed in different directions. The Broncos were locking up a #1 seed for the playoffs, and the Ravens were struggling after 2 straight losses to secure the AFC North Division crown. A national tragedy occurred on Friday, December 16th, and rendered everything else on that weekend trivial, including Sunday's NFL games. On that Friday morning, a disturbed young man gunned down 21st grade students and 6 teachers at Sandy Hook Elementary in Newtown, Connecticut. The entire nation, including NFL players, mourned the victims. On that Saturday afternoon, I went to pick up my children, Mary, Julia, and Quinn, at my son's kindergarten, Brown Memorial. They were making gingerbread houses for the holidays with a dozen other children in the classroom. I stopped as I walked down the hallway and listened to their voices, talking and laughing as they decorated their miniature dwellings. They were having a lot of fun squeezing icing over the rooftops and laying down sourdough shingles. They used peppermints for tiles to line the walkways. I went down and sat next to my daughter in one of the small chairs. With a lump in my throat, I helped her make licorice windows. I looked across the table at my son and thought of Jack Pinto, the boy who had loved the New York Giants. My 6-year-old son had just finished his first season of tackle football. Those Sandy Hook children had been his age. I didn't care about the Ravens game anymore. So we move into the Denver game, and then I'll just take you through to the end. The Broncos jumped out to a 10-0 first half lead. The Ravens defense held Denver on 2 successive possessions, and the offense went to work with 2 minutes left in the half. Flacco found Jacoby Jones for a 43-yard gain. A few plays later, he completed a pass to Torrey Smith, who was tackled at the Denver 4. The crowd was on their feet for the first time in the half, screaming for a touchdown to get back in the game. The clock showed 30 seconds left. If they scored with 20 seconds left, that was hardly enough time even for Peyton Manning to march down the field. Take a timeout, I said. What's the rush? It was a crucial moment in a season that was dangerously close to implosion. Jim Caldwell finally had the offense rolling down the field. A 10-0 Bronco lead approaching halftime was about to be cut to 3. Why not take a timeout and talk about it? I thought of Butch in the seat next to me and the conversations we'd had about clock management related to Billy Cundiff's missed kick in the ACF championship game against New England. We should have taken a timeout that time too. Butch wasn't there. He had stayed home to watch. Joe Flacco dropped back to pass and threw into the left corner of the end zone toward Anquan Bolden. The throw was a fraction late and lacked the normal zip that we were accustomed to seeing. His short throws in the last 3 weeks had started to sail on him, while his long throws had started floating. Denver safety Chris Harris stepped into the passing lane and intercepted the pass at the goal line. Harris raced down the sidelines. Flacco took off in pursuit, avoiding a blocker and cutting off Harris's angle to the goal line. But Joe ran out of field, and his headlong dive at Harris's ankles as the Denver cornerback fell into the end zone was futile. Ravens photographer Phil Hoffman tells the young shutterbugs on the sidelines not to get discouraged when they miss a play. All too often they'll beat themselves up as the player runs into the end zone. He encourages them to stick with the play because he says you never know what is going to happen at the end of it. You might catch something that no one else gets because the others had already focused on the great play. At the end of the Harris interception, Flacco gave the photographers a little extra to shoot. He put his head down on the field and stayed there on the goal line for a few seconds. It was a rare moment of emotion from the quarterback during a challenging stretch in his 5-year career. He had fumbled in 3 straight games. He had thrown interceptions, but not a pick six since the Houston game. For a few fleeting seconds, Joe Cool had let his guard down. It instantly became a national social media phenomenon known as Flaccoing. The game was over when he put his head down. It was another ugly and demoralizing loss. The Broncos extended the lead to 31-3 in the second half before the Ravens put up some meaningless touchdowns late and ended up losing 34-18. This game sucks, Ravens center Matt Burke said to one of the coaches on the sidelines. And now we'll just go to the end, and we'll talk about Coach Harbaugh here. Ravens season ticket holders, because we in Baltimore we get very fickle, and we call the radio shows and think the world is going to end when we're in losing streaks. Ravens season ticket holders started listing their personal seat licenses for sale on Craigslist with greater frequency. With ticket prices going up every year in a bad economy, a team that couldn't get to the next level was no longer worth the expense. How long would the city support a Ravens team that didn't fulfill expectations? The window was closing on Ray Lewis and Ed Reed to win a championship. If 2012 wasn't the year, and it sure didn't look like that way, it might never happen at all. The franchise would have to rebuild the defense without Lewis and Reed. A return to prominence could take years, even with Terrell Suggs playing linebacker. As the negativity swirled around the Ravens, Harbaugh focused on the interior. He stayed at home with his players and began the healing process. He had worked his entire coaching career for just such a situation. Coaches earn their living during times of adversity, and there was no better person to lead this team through a losing streak than John Harbaugh. Nothing could shake his resolve or positive nature. He didn't have the relentless competitive edge that his brother Jim possessed, but John could harness the sheer positive force of his will at any time. A couple of weeks after the 2011 playoff loss to the Patriots, Steve Davis had spoken with John Harbaugh. He couldn't wait to get going on the new season. He had moved on from New England. That's over with. We're done with that, he told me. Davis said, the coaches don't have the luxury that fans do to dwell on games. They are back at it at 5 a.m. the next day. The tension that weighed on Harbaugh from having to defend a moribund offense week after week had been lifted. He no longer had to answer questions with words he didn't believe. It was liberating and frightening at the same time because a shot at the Super Bowl still existed. Cameron was out and no longer the scapegoat for an underperforming team. Everyone in the organization, not just one embattled coordinator, now owned a piece of the outcome. the whole team was under fire.